Hi, my name's Milo Rodriguez. I work with Lucid and Jade Absinthe across the US with a wonderful distiller, chemist, and absinthe historian by the name of Ted Bro, who I get to travel with on occasion and have some good times with. My background and role and my history is in the UK as a bartender in London for about 8 years, working in some of the finer cocktail establishments. And back in those days, 10, 15 years ago, it was a different ball game, and bartending was still seen as being tending bar, not being a mixologist. And so I felt very much with a few of my colleagues that we really pushed the program in London and helped spread things around Europe subsequently over the last 10 years. Later, I got to work with some other brands, some small French brands such as Chartreuse as the UK ambassador for a few years. Some great times to be had there, as you can imagine. And later on, working with Angostura rums and bitters across Europe and a little bit elsewhere in the Caribbean. So I had some great times traveling, trying to teach and present in different languages and talking about Angostura's history with its bitters. I was also lucky enough to help create their orange bitters as well, which is a newer product that they've had for the last 10 years and a wonderful product too. Currently, I get to work and travel around the US, interacting with sommeliers, bartenders, mixologists, and really just spreading the word of the Green Fairy and really introducing them to something very important, which is the guy behind this wonderful brand, that for most bartenders in America, they were lucky over the last 10 years to taste and mix Sazeracs and other absinthe cocktails with what we call these days legit absinthe, real absinthe. And what does that mean, traditional real absinthe? We'll talk about that shortly, but essentially no additives, no colorings, all traditionally made with no oils and no essences whatsoever, just 100% distilled herbs and spices, hence the natural green color in Lucid. And absinthe these days, thanks to Ted's efforts, where my role comes in spreading the word of the Green Fairy, not just Lucid and Jade, is really talking about what makes real absinthe special and why it should be on your back bar, which is why I'm here today. In terms of using absinthe, that's probably an area amongst bartenders in the country that's probably the least understood out of spirits out there. And I understand why, because until a few years back, working in New York in a bar called Maison Premiere, working with an amazing bar team with a New Orleans themed program of oysters and absinthe and an ever-changing absinthe menu of cocktails, did I really understood the category. And so by trial and error, I figured out the processes, what Blanche and Swiss absinthe meant, what green vert absinthe is from France, and really what traditional absinthe was as well. And with cocktail application with absinthe, that's a big area and something I'll talk about very shortly, but wanted to touch on this wonderful method of absinthe service, the traditional fountain French drip method service. And in this case, it's a process that can be apply to most bars out there. There is a little bit of real estate involved, taking all this accoutrements of fountain, drip, spoon, etc., and implementing that into your bar program. There's people and brands like us, myself with Lucid and Jade, that can help you with that. But essentially the process is time-honored and slow, involving a very slow dripping method. No faster, that's actually a little too quick. And it's talking about really releasing the flavor of absinthe, drinking in its truest sense, almost essentially neat with a little bit of dilution, about 3 to 4 parts water, chilled water, hence the ice, to 1 part absinthe. And what that does allows those flavors of wormwood, fennel, anise, those are the 3 main botanicals in absinthe, to open up. And immediately, high-end absinthes, such as in the case of our ultra-premium range of Jade absinthes, which are just shy of $100 per bottle, is a great way to allow the expression of this flavor to be highlighted for the guest and not tarnishing it by putting other flavors and ingredients. So a wonderful classic way. One thing that we've found over the years that's a wonderful talking point with this is how much attention it gets from other people in the bar and how people are sort of nudging each other, wondering, what are they drinking? What is that? And they'll ask the bartender or the server and expect the same. So table service can also be applied. However, most bartenders I've interacted with will often tell me they're worried about these things breaking. We all have elbows. They get knocked over and broken. They're not the cheapest thing to carry as well. So another lovely way to implement it is using another old ritualistic role of the absinthe, the term to describe the nerd of absinthe in its heyday. And the absinthe would have something called a balancier, which is essentially a little extra add-on tool just to put onto a regular rocks glass or goblet, and allowing yourself the option to pour water over this, seesawing the water over the absinthe and allowing the flavors to open up slowly and in front of the guest. Immediately what we notice as well, people want to grab their phone and Instagram and Facebook this because it's just such a lovely talking point and just a lovely way to implement absinthe in your program. Another great way to taking this all away is, of course, in cocktails. And The synonymous atomizer and spritz is something that we see prevalent across coast to coast. A wonderful way to add a little bit of an extra nuance on the nose, just spritzing over a cocktail, works wonderfully to kind of get the guest involved. The bar can smell it as well. Anyone who's been to an absinthe event and have cocktails in front of them will know that the room is smelling of fennel, wormwood, and anise. It's an intoxicating smell and gets people involved in talking. So a lovely way to go. But I would urge you to be a little bit more adventurous and push the program and look at some old classic cocktails with absinthe. And one area to go, one amazing publication that's for Ted and myself, almost the desert island discs of cocktail guides. If you had to be whisked away, this is the one to grab, the Savoy Cocktail Book. Why? Harry Craddock was an American bartender, lost his job thanks to Prohibition and the temperance movement, had to work and live in Europe, and ran the Savoy Hotel, and created this guide and this bar, the American Bath, with over 100 absinthe recipes in there. So it's a great way to begin, for example, a cocktail competition. You're looking for inspiration and ideas. Look at those core classics of 4 or 5 ingredient cocktails and then work from there to kind of put your own spin and your own play on that. One of the most traditional absinthe forward and classic cocktails from New Orleans, a great heyday, for example, at the old Absinthe House. If you've been to Tales of the Cocktail, you'll know what I'm talking about. And you'll have one of these drinks. And think about New Orleans in the summertime with no AC or refrigeration, no way to quench your thirst. And this beautiful crushed ice classic was a way to do that. Shaken absinthe with a drop of simple syrup and equal parts chilled water together with absinthe, shaken over crushed ice. It doesn't really get more refreshing than that as a classic. I've added a little sage and mint in this recipe and just put a spin on that. A lovely way to go is, instead of simple syrup, just a bar spoon or a 1/4 ounce, is taking Benedictine, that honey liqueur, or for example almond syrup, orgeat, which works traditionally in some absinthe frappes as well. So lots of room to play with, a great example to put on a menu and then play with that and theme that drink based on your program.
So as far as implementation of an absinthe program, as a buyer, there's always been a couple concerns that I had, and that is the initial purchase price is usually quite high.
Yes.
And the equipment that you have to do, as you mentioned with a traditional absinthe service, can also be pretty expensive, right?
Right.
So how can the average operator implement a system like this, or feature them on a cocktail menu, for example, with a higher price point?
Absolutely. I mean, these initially are replicas, so that's a good thing there. Thank God we're not talking in the tens of thousands. So these will range from a few $100 tops for a particular shape design that you can pick up via a few companies based in Louisiana. And that's something that a lot of the absinthe producers, such as Lucid and Jade, and that we can work with and help support and implement. In terms of the actual purchasing of absinthe, traditional absinthe at that price, around $50 is kind of the ballpark base number for a decent, traditionally well-made absinthe, and up to the hundreds. And truly, rarely less do you find an absinthe of any kind of quality and traditionally made, i.e. kind of like a London dry gin style, no additives, no oils added. This kind of style of absinthe, such as Lucid and others out there, mean a lot of botanicals going in. So to compare to gin, for example, you're talking a very small percentage of botanicals, herbs and spices to the actual alcohol. With absinthe production, you're talking about 50-60% botanicals to the alcohol mix. So time consuming as well, using old traditional stills in many cases, and it takes a lot longer to make as well. One last thing as well that a lot of people don't aware with absinthe, good, well-made bottled absinthe ages in the bottle. So for our example, in our absinthe, we age our absinthe 3 years minimum before we even bottle and finish and ship. So again, an additional aspect just to hold the product as well. So it is an initial investment, and I would say that the best way to implement these programs is also via training, is making sure that your crew, your team, understand the basics and know the differences between these absinthes. And what's the best way to do that, Chris? Taste. Just get those bottles off the bar and taste them.
Yeah, and I know that one of the things that I've always kind of focused on with beverage programs in general is when you're implementing top tier ingredients like this, is not to focus on the profit margin, because we typically try to hit a 15 to 20% profit margin in cost of goods. Right. And the thing that we can kind of get tied up on is focusing on those numbers versus focusing on the amount of money that you're making on these. Right. So is that something you can speak about?
Yeah, absolutely. Taking it up in terms of just a basic example of serving, say, 3 absinthe drips, absolutely wonderful. But if you were to serve 3 standard whiskies for the same process, neat in a glass, the time taken is the same, but the return value for me with absinthe in this kind of process is exponentially more. And using just a basic absinthe of a $50, $60 mark, to give you an example, serving one of these or a cocktail with that, $11 to $15 is kind of like a base level entry price for a absinthe forward cocktail, and you can go well into over 20 for that. And generally, in my experience, when bars have implemented this, and say, for example, a standard cocktail list or spirits list of a wide range of spirits and cocktails, say from $10 to $15, when a guest sees an absinthe forward cocktail for $18, $20 plus, there's usually no fight back, no argument. It's actually kind of, why is this price? And when they find out that it's real absinthe, it's usually the clincher for them. So it's often an easy gateway into it as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've noticed, I've kind of used this analogy before, but imagine two different cocktail orders, same time coming in. You have a vodka tonic and you have an absinthe. Your vodka tonic is probably going to be about $6 if it's well, maybe up to $10, you know, if it's a premium style. And you probably have about $2 worth of product cost in there versus absinthe, where your cost of goods is probably $2 to $5 if you're going on the higher end, but your margin is $20, $25. So instead of looking at the percentage that you're making, you're looking at the dollars that you're taking in. Those are very different conversations to have.
That's a very nice way to put it. I think that summed it up quite nicely.
Right. So in kind of to wrap everything up, don't really focus on the margins. Look at the opportunity cost there. You're going to have to sell a lot of vodka tonics to make up the same amount of profits that you would by having one top tier cocktail like what we've talked about. And the dollars are definitely there to have.
Not to mention the return value with the guests and the experience they have and that feeling that they want to come back to see you and your program, and also the other experiences then you can bring them. I find over the years, knowledge is power is the real key, and obviously then having a good business mind on the back of that is the holy grail.
Sure. And I mean, when we talk about base spirits in general, you know, like gin and bourbon, typically what we see is a big portion of the cocktail is made up by that component, because you need that to deliver the flavor.
Spirit, right.
Right. So with absinthe, though, the fact that it's so powerful and balancing that is most of the skill when working with absinthe, that you don't need to bring the same quantity.
It's a nice way to say, in other words, that you're spending a premium to buy a bottle of decent absinthe, legit absinthe, as we like to say these days. At that point, you know it's going to last a little bit longer than a regular product, that you've also got the opportunity to implement that in other programs. And, you know, the general shelf life of an absinthe in a standard bar could be in the matter of months, weeks and months, as opposed to the matter of hours, as in some cases, such as whiskeys in your speed rail. But that's a nice talking point as well. Just again, when you're talking from $50 to $60, $70, there really isn't that much of a difference in terms of using absinthe on the regular.
And then now one of the things that we were talking about off camera earlier was identifying legitimate absinthe. Is there any kind of tricks, tips, anything you would recommend for people to be on the lookout for?
Absolutely, yes. A big one is, of course, the bottle itself. I was always taught as a bar manager to learn and read your bottles. When you've got time, you've cleaned everything, go clean it again, and then read those back bar bottles and study what's going on. And with absinthe, thank God, in the US, we have that information that we need to know if it's a proper, traditionally made absinthe or not. There'll be coloring aspects on the bottom or the front of the bottle to let you know. Sure. Secondly, the amount of botanicals in terms of its makeup, in terms of distillation, is really, really prevalent in one way. Not as a sign of a quality absinthe, but of a sign to say whether the absinthe is traditionally and correctly made, is the process of luching, which basically adding of ice-cold water and watching the phenyl and anise, particularly in production. Phenyl and anise are the botanicals and distillation that causes absinthe to luche, to go cloudy and opaque. And the more luching that you get, in other words, the thicker the cloud and darker the opaqueness of the product, you have this magical transformation that occurs, but you have a sign that things have been made correctly. Perfect. That the botanicals are natural, that they're real. In our case, we grow them locally. So again, we can control that as well. And you can just see within a few drops the difference that makes and how
Yeah.
thick and luscious that is, almost
Absolutely.
chalky. So that's a lovely, lovely way to see if absinthe is being correctly distilled and made. And secondly, as I said, really just study the packaging and look for any little signs that may be saying, you know, where's the origin of the absinthe? Where is it actually made? What's the address, the distillery? And if it's not listed, that's often can be a bad sign as well. Thankfully, with Ted Bro's efforts with creating Lucid and Jade, things have changed in America. We have amazing absinthes being made from here in San Francisco all the way through to both coasts. So look out for those regional absinthes. Some of them are fantastic to use. But importantly, it's nice to know where they're coming from. It's nice to know that that things are changing for the better. And last but not least, Ted is working very hard on a definition for absinthe in the US. Switzerland is the only country thus far in the world that has strict definition for absinthe, in kind of in the similar way that I've talked about. But soon you'll hopefully see a category that will become even more premium, and some of those absinthes that you'll see for $20, $30 on the shelf that often are not traditionally correctly made, essentially bathtub gin, just essences and oils added, will disappear from the market.
Sure.